Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a 2019 horror film directed by Andrei Orvidal. He's the director of many films such as The Autopsy of Jane Doe and Troll Hunter, and was co-written and produced by Guillermo del Toro, who I think is the biggest pull for this film. He's been known for many different projects over the years, I think most notably Hellboy, but he also directed The Shape of Water, which was an Academy Award-winning film. He also directed Crimson Peak, which was a horror film from a couple years back, and now they have combined forces to make a movie adaptation of the classic children's book series Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This was a trilogy of scary story anthology storybooks that were written by Alvin Schwartz and illustrated famously by Stephen Gammell, with some of the illustrations being straight out of children's nightmares, and it freaked out a lot of kids, similar to Goosebumps, if you were a fan when you grew up as a child. I wasn't as familiar with the stories in these books as I was with Goosebumps when that film came out, though I must say when I revisited these books, I've been reading a lot of the stories and listening to the audio narrations online, you can definitely tell that many of these stories are from folklore. You probably have heard a lot of these around the campfire or when you were younger, and it brings back a certain childhood fun to these stories. So when the film was announced, I was eager to see how they would adapt so many stories into a film. So what they've essentially done is picked several of the most popular stories from the books and combined them into one narrative story involving a creepy girl named Sarah who is hated by her family, and there is a haunted house where her storybook of creepy tales lurks. And these kids on Halloween visit the haunted house, they break in essentially, and find this storybook, and the storybook reads them and begins to project their names and themselves into these horrendous stories from the children's book. So it's a really interesting concept. They somewhat did this with the Goosebumps film that came out several years back with Jack Black in it, if you remember that far back. And I have to say, just overall general consensus, I had a lot of fun with Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and I would recommend this film. There are many creepy moments, and I would say that this film, it hits all the right beats. It is PG-13, but I think even the die-hard horror fan, like myself, who likes maybe the more gritty things, is still going to find this film to be very creepy and unsettling, but it's not too gory, over the top, or profane, where a younger audience couldn't enjoy it either. Because remember, the stories were intended for children, so it's good that they're aiming this film at children and adults, people who read the books when they were children. It's really great how they tied that all together. There are some issues, but there are a lot of pros with the film. I think, first of all, the look of the film is beautiful. The shots are amazing. The creature effects, the practical effects that they took time to make based off of the illustrations from the original stories, they're great. They're wonderful. All of the creatures are really creepy and fantastic. They truly bring the horror to life. I think one thing they could have done is had this film come out around Halloween time, because it's set during the October season and early November, which would have made it more interesting, but it's still cool that this film sort of kicks off the season, and I can see people, including myself, re-watching Scary Stories around Halloween time annually, which I think is a great thing, especially for a series that was so progressive in pushing these scary stories. So that's cool to see. The story itself fleshes out the monsters somewhat well, though the biggest gripes with the film are more of narrative nitpicks. I think that some of the monsters didn't really have a set origin or folklore behind them as they did in the books. They more so just show up for shock factor and nostalgia. And don't get me wrong, the monsters are easily one of the best parts of the film. It just seems like the original stories that made them stand out weren't there. And that really brings me to one thing that I wish the film would have done from the get-go, is to make the movie a horror anthology, to have many short stories, short films, in one big film. If you've ever seen the 1982 film Creepshow, you know how easily this could have been done with especially the source material in mind. But for what they accomplished in this movie, it's a fun time. Again, kids and adults are going to enjoy the creatures and the monsters and the creepy scenarios that the characters must go through. There's one in particular that's super unsettling, and that is the ghostly woman from The Dream. I won't get into, where she appears in the film, but you've seen her no doubt in most of the trailers and promotional material. Very unsettling stuff. The costume work is phenomenal. Everything about the movie is really spectacular. It's really just the narrative nitpicks I wish they could have fixed. But again, you have to suspend your disbelief. Have a fun time with this movie. You will most certainly enjoy it. And what's great is older horror enthusiasts can watch this with younger kids, and both can see different sides of the stories and can relate to one another. And that's really cool. I'm glad they made a film based off of the books, because they are so iconic. I hope that people who watch the films will read the books, and people who've read the books will watch the film. It works really great. It's a symbiotic relationship, and it gets the Halloween season pumping in the veins of people going to see the movie. Overall, I'm going to give Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark a 3.5 out of 5 skulls on the R.I.P. Reviews rating scale. If you want to have a creepy, fun time at the movies, check out Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It didn't necessarily freak me out with anything super over the top or gory or really intense, but it was a fun time. It had some eerie moments, and it harkened back to what made the book creepy. Hope you guys enjoyed this review. I'm going to go into a little spoilers right now, so if you don't want to hear about those, you can end the video here, but I thank you for watching. Let's talk a little more in depth.
The jangling man is coming.
So let's talk for a second about some of the stories that were seen throughout the film. I narrated some of these stories in a previous video I did, but essentially there are 5, kinda 6, if you count the haunted house one, which is more of just a reference to the image that was so iconic from the books. But the main 5 stories that they touch on are Harold, which is about a creepy scarecrow that comes to life and is abused, which makes him come to life. There is The Red Spot, which is about a girl who gets a zit, but it's really a spider bite on her cheek, and spiders swarm out of her face. Very grotesque, one of the most gross scenes in the movie. Me Tai Dodie Walker, which is my personal favorite from the book. I wish the jangly man was a little more... I guess you could tell he was CGI in the movie. I wish he was a little more practical in some of the shots with maybe a contortionist. But they did a good job, and he's very creepy nonetheless. You also have The Dream, which is, again, the creepy woman that we saw in a lot of the promotional stuff. The original story is about a girl who goes to a hotel and stays in a room that she remembers from her dream. And finally, the original story from the first book, The Big Toe, which is about a boy who finds a toe in his garden. His mom makes it into a soup, and a zombie comes back wanting their toe. All of these stories are pretty popular from the books, so it was cool to see them adapted to the big screen. They reference Sam's Pet, which is another story. They reference several stories throughout the books. They also reference the Hearst song many times. It's played on a music box throughout the film. A woman even sings some of it. So it's cool that all of these references kind of come together to make the story more rich and harken back to what made the book, again, so unique. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Did you like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? I want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and remember, as always, for all things Halloween, this is Hauntformer.